Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Happiness in Higher Education podcast. My name is John Hill, and today we have Chase Catalano. And real quickly, I'm just going to read off our mission statement again. So, in a world that can be engulfed in darkness, we must shine bright and lead the change for a better future. As we continue to shape and challenge emerging adults' minds, it is also our duty to reflect and remember what makes us happy and why we continue to do the work that we do. So without further ado, I am going to introduce Chase Catalano. And D. Chase J. Catalano is an assistant professor in higher education at Virginia Tech and previously served as an assistant professor at Western Illinois University and the College Student Personnel Program for 4 years. Before becoming a faculty member, Chase worked in various functional areas in student affairs, with the most recent position as the director of the LGBT Resource Center at Syracuse University for 5 years. As a trans scholar, someone who both identifies as transmasculine and studies trans identities and experiences in higher education, his focus area for research center on social justice education with specific attention to transness and queerness. He is a co-editor for Readings for Diversity and Social Justice, 4th edition. Beyond his multiple book chapters, he published articles in Equity and Excellence in Education, Transgender Studies Quarterly, International Journal. It's really hard to read your whole bio. It's very extensive. But International Journal of Qualitative Studies in Education and Journal for Diversity in Education. His current research is on the experience of safe zone slash safe space slash ally training facilitators. So Chase, would you like to say a little more about that?
I don't know. I think you said it all. I don't know what else I could say. It sounds impressive to me. I think I've written them enough times that I finally got it to sound reasonable.
Did you have to redo this, or is this one that you just copied and pasted and sent me over?
It's I use the same template and then tweak and change for audiences because I hate writing my bio. It feels like one of the most gross things that I could do.
Well, you do have a very extensive bio, and honestly, you are an awesome scholar, awesome person, and I appreciate you for being here for this. But what we're going to do is we're going to get right into the questions. So, what was the reason you started to pursue a career in higher education?
Sure. So, I think a lot of people have. I often hear the story that people didn't know that you could have a career in higher education, right? And yeah, it's pretty common. I don't have that story. So I'm a first generation college student, but one of the first people that I dated in college, my first year of college, was a couple of years ahead of me. And she was getting ready to apply to higher ed, college student affairs, graduate programs. So I learned from my first semester in college, even though I knew nothing about this thing called college, that you could have a career working in higher education and doing student affairs work specifically. So that was my path, and I realized that I really liked college. It was the first place that probably felt like home, where I really felt like I could be my whole self, and that led me to feel like that's the place where I want to work. That's the context that I want to be in. And I've never left. So, I started in the mid 90s and I continue to work in higher education. I've not spent a year away from higher education since then.
Got you. And I for sure, one of those people, as you saw, I raised my hand. I didn't even know that this was a profession, even though one of my supervisors was sitting in front of me telling me that you could have a job. And I was like, I didn't know that was a thing. And yet, once again, they were sitting right there.
Mm-hmm.
But what made you, I'm curious, because you were a professional and then you went to the faculty side of things. So what did that look like for you? And what was that shift?
So I started my doc program in 2003, and it took me 10 years to finish. So part of the reason it took that long is that I took a job, a full-time job at Syracuse University as the LGBT Center Director. And I knew before I took that job that eventually I would want to go the faculty route. I just didn't know what that would look like. And I also knew that wasn't going to happen until I finished my doctorate. So About a year, the year following, when I finished my doctorate, I did my first round of applications for faculty positions. Did a couple phone interviews, had an on-campus, and didn't get the position, but that didn't dissuade me. So the next year, I applied for more. And I'm sorry, my dogs are having a conversation. Yep, and that's when I got the position at Western. And so I guess what I would say is I was very intentional when I was working full time in student affairs to keep up with writing. I had the opportunity, I was invited in to write a couple of book chapters and participate as a co principal investigator with a colleague on a research study that led to a couple of publications from us. So that work, made me relevant to applying for faculty positions. And I also was teaching at Syracuse. So I was lucky that the intergroup dialogue program there, Dr. Gretchen Lopez, who's the director of that program, was really open to me teaching. And from the relationship I formed with her, Dr. Barbara Applebaum invited me to teach a graduate seminar after I finished my dissertation. So those were opportunities that really helped me, be a strong candidate, because even though positions for faculty in higher ed programs sometimes say that they're looking for people with student affairs or higher education experience, they're also looking for people with a proven publication track record and the possibility of publishing. So that becomes a little bit of a challenge.
So you kind of had those experiences throughout the whole process. So you had that mindset going in that you were like, this is it. This is the end game for me.
Yes, for me, the faculty position was the end game, right? I will say that there was a moment where I was wondering, do I want to move up in higher ed and student affairs? And yep, my partner has now taken them out of my office so that they could do shenanigans outside. Like they haven't been in here all day with me, but that's fine. So they decide to play whenever I'm on a call. There was a moment when I was not sure if I wanted to apply for faculty positions or move up in higher education and specifically in student affairs. And I had a pretty bad experience talking to a potential search firm about my qualifications, that they didn't believe that as being a director of an LGBT resource center that I had much room to move up. And that I think what they saw was that they saw me, I think, kind of as a specialist, not really. And that told me a lot about how they were viewing my position instead of being what a lot of folks who run cultural centers are, which are like the dean of students for that marginalized student population.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't think I would have the ability to be a vice president or a dean of students, or that I would be able to speak to those experiences, because I think they only saw me as being an LGBT center director. And that's just an N of one, but it was enough to make me realize that even if that was going to be the case for a lot of the possibilities, or even not a lot of them, I realized that I don't have the interest to be that level of responsibility. It's a lot of work to be vice president, assistant vice president, dean of students, what have you. And I was tired. I was tired from being an administrator for 5 years, and I couldn't imagine the level of politics and development and public relations and managing people and managing personalities and dealing with institutional dynamics that were not going to change, or were going to continue to pretend they didn't expect such a range of students to show up at their institution, right? The neoliberal project was pretty strong, and I was tired of playing it.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for sharing. And so moving on to our next question, and this is a loaded question. So what makes you happy? One thing from higher education, and then one personal thing.
Sure. And you know me, I can't answer questions that you ask directly. So instead, I will tell you that
Yes.
the closest I could get to one thing from higher education that makes me happy is I enjoy doing work that matters. It's important to me that my work has meaning to practitioners, to other scholars, to students. Um, it has to mean something. I'm not just here to churn out articles or produce something. I'm not applying for grants to do things that are just to get a grant, to say that I've received a grant of X amount of dollars. It has to be meaningful work, and that makes me happy because I can see the ways that it is a dynamic interchange between what I'm doing, whether it's teaching, whether it's the students. I want the students to have a good experience in the class. Not That doesn't necessarily mean that they're happy, but it does mean that they are learning, that they are having um, thoughtful, critical conversations.
Mhm.
Um, what makes me happy in my personal life? All right, well, I'll give you three things, which is my dogs, my partner, and getting new tattoos.
Getting new tattoos. Okay. Have you had any new ink recently? I know it's still COVID and the pandemic, but have you had any ink recently?
Not since COVID. At this point I have I'm working on finishing my half sleeve.
Okay.
And I want it to the half sleeve's almost done. So I want to finish this sleeve, and then um I want to do a calf sleeve. So we'll see where that goes.
Okay.
But I haven't been able to get a tattoo since COVID, and it's pretty tragic.
I'm so sorry. But no, your tattoos, they look awesome. Honestly, they look amazing. I want to get eventually want to get a full sleeve. So we'll once I
Good.
make
Okay.
once I make more money one day, it's fine.
Yes.
um, but the next thing that we got here is, so what keeps you resilient in the face of some of the challenges you faced this year or in general with, budget cuts, stress of the pandemic, just, you said that you're working on manuscripts and things like that, book chapters, everything, teaching.
Sure. Okay. I think maybe I could say what keeps me motivated is that I'm building my career, right? I'm not. This isn't just a job. And so going back to what matters for me, I want to do good work. I want to work with good people. I want to support and amplify the work of good people. And so that's what, gets me up in the morning and gets me working all day long. I'm also, incredibly boring and have a very rigid routine. And so that it once you have a habit formed, it's hard to break it. And so, we get up early, take care of the dogs, sit down and go to work, and that's when they get like their first treat of the day, and so they rush me to the office regardless of whether I want to go or not, and sit there and wait until and so and then I work, and I think I've been luckier, or more privileged than most, right? We don't have any children, just the furry ones, and so I didn't have to worry about educating anyone. I think my students really experience Zoom fatigue, and all the things, and pedagogy over a Zoom platform is a challenge. Um, and I think I took the mindset of we do the best we can with what we have and where we are. And some days that for some of the students I think looked like more engagement, and other days it looked like less. And my job was to keep steady.
Mhm.
I needed to be there every day, and I needed to put in the effort, and they could give what they could give. And I think that's probably part of what bolstered me through as well.
Mhm.
Um, Budget cuts are always terrible, and I've been I'm at a well resourced research one institution, and so I haven't had to suffer the effects of that in the same way that I did when I was at Western Illinois. That as a regional comprehensive, really felt the effects of budget issues, particularly through the state of Illinois. Virginia is a very different state, and state economies look very different. So, and when I distract myself with projects like putting in a tulip bed in the front lawn, or you know trying to reseed my lawn, things that have end goals that I can actually appreciate, opposed to some of the cerebral stuff that feels like it's a conversation that will never end.
True, true. And I think that one thing that I appreciated what you had said is like particularly like with the students and like with you and the pedagogy and like the teaching is that like 100% looks for different individuals, different days. 100% could just be showing up one day. 100% could be being fully engaged, talking about the readings, talking about everything that they experienced, with the material, and then you're a rock star all the time, but like 100% looks different all the time,
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. I think that compassion is really so important, especially because I don't know what's happening on the other end of that Zoom camera for them and what they're dealing with. And so I only have them for 3 hours, a week. And I tend to teach the classes that are not necessarily the most, they're not the ones that people get excited about taking in our program, right? I don't think people are like, I cannot wait. I mean, there are some people, but they're strange, but that are like, I cannot wait to take higher ed law. I cannot wait to take the history of higher education. Uh, nope. That those are my two staple classes, and I gotta find a different way to do it, or think about it, or approach it, or give interesting assignments so that students can find something to be excited about. That maybe even if it just distracts them for a couple hours from all the other things that they're dealing with, but also allows them to bring their whole self to the class. And so my job is to hold the course steady so that they can come in and out as they need.
True. And I mean, I will say when you had taught my first year in grad school, when you had taught Oregon admin, I will tell you that you made it very exciting, you made it fun. And I can tell you now that I can officially read an org chart when someone gives me one. I can actually read it, and I can also tell the differences on how different institutions, like you were talking about the Research One institutions, or like a small public or a small private arts college, looking at those, I can actually tell the differences between, oh, this position is this position. So I will tell you, you've probably had way more experiences, but at the person talking to you right now, it makes sense and it connects. So I appreciate you for that.
My job here is done. I mean, I think people have really lofty, I don't know. I guess I don't know what other faculty goals are for teaching, but I want students to get practical information out of a class, but also, I don't want that to be the end, right? I want practical information, and I want you to think complicatedly about whatever it is that we're talking about. And so, this summer, my goal is to reimagine how to teach law and higher ed through a social justice framework, right? And how do you do that and balance learning about the challenges with free speech, the challenges with a conduct system that reflects the current legal system we have that uses prisons, and what does that mean if you have a prison abolition framework, right? So that's the interesting thing for me. Well, I don't know how interesting it'll be for students, but anything's got to be better than trying to teach it like it's a law school class, which serves no one.
Just read a book, write a paper, hope for the best.
Right. I mean, then I might as well just have a bunch of independent studies.
It's true. That is very true. That is true. But so moving on to the next question. So what are some of the ways that you practice self-care to stay on your A game? I know that you had mentioned probably like the tulip bed and stuff like that, but what are some other ones?
I mean, my routine is part of my self-care, right? That I have a consistent routine. I think when growing up, I was, I'm sure I read or was told that the more consistent you do things, the more it makes things easier to do. And that's true. It's true about writing as well. 30 minutes a day, it's a habit, and you stick with it. And so, those are self-care for me, because then I don't feel the same anxiety, right? Oh, when am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? Right? I do a weekly plan every week. The National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity boot camp program that I did last summer was wonderful for me to like set up some good stuff, and that those structures for me really help eliminate anxiety, feeling overwhelmed, creating a plan, right? I'm a Myers Briggs J in that way. Like it helps
Mhm.
me to have a plan. Um, I'll take a break and just hang out with the dogs. I've definitely crawled on the floor with them and just cuddled, or I'll take them outside and do stuff. Throw the ball. They'll watch me throw the ball. I'll retrieve it myself. That's usually part of how it goes. Um, what do I do for self care? Those are really the big things that I do. I like to have evenings with my partner and the dogs, right? We have a routine that we do every night, and
Mhm.
that's helpful. Yeah, I mean, those are really the big things that I do. I'm not really that interesting. I read a lot. Um, so one of the things that I'll do for self care this summer, because being a faculty member, I'm not used to having summers off. Because even when I was teaching at Western, I still taught during the summer at least
Mhm.
one, if not two classes. And so, having a summer off, right? Which isn't, it's not really true. I don't really get the summer off. I have doc students who are working on things, and I have, publications that I'm working on. But one of the things I incorporated into this summer's plan is to require myself to do a couple of hours a week of what I call exploratory reading, right? So I read a lot of fiction. That's what I read when I'm not working. And that helps me unplug from what I'm doing, like totally terrible, trashy fiction, sci-fi, whatever, urban fantasy. Like the things that are less real, the better. Um,
Noted,
that
just for
is
future
super
reference.
that is super important to me. So like, if anyone ever finds me on Goodreads, like don't judge me for the things that I'm reading. But for the summer, what I'm going to do is I have all of these really interesting books that don't necessarily fit into what I'm writing or what I'm researching, or what I'm teaching. And sometimes it's really good to read other things. Um, that are outside of my discipline they're just really interesting. I mean, I just got Esther Newton's memoir, which is super exciting for me to read. I got to see her give a reading of her book, Margaret Mead Made Me Gay, when I was living in Western Massachusetts, and got to meet her then. And I'm just super excited to read this memoir, which has absolutely nothing to do technically with anything that I'm working on.
Mhm.
But I also have, like, what are some of the books? I have a book on academic ableism. I have Chris Barcelos's book on distributing condoms, which is about youth, um, sex, and pregnancy, and class, and it's super fascinating ethnography. And I don't write about any of those things really,
Mhm.
not in the way that they do, but it's just nice to kind of open my brain up and read other things and think about them, and maybe I could make a connection to them, or maybe it's just really interesting, you know.
Nice. Nice. I know it's funny when you're talking about like read a book. It's like Chase, you got a ton to pick from right behind you.
Oh,
Used
yep.
to
And
have
I think I've at least read some of them.
that's a goal of mine. Is I think this year alone I've like read I think like 15 books so far. It's an accomplishment for someone that doesn't that when in high school was like a book, they'd hand me a book and I'd be like, yeah, I'll just sit on my desk. I won't actually read it. But
Mhm.
it's interesting to like look at how extensive my own personal library has been getting, because that's
Mhm.
the one rule is that I have to read it to have it in the library. So
Okay,
yeah, almost got a full bookshelf.
that's great.
Yeah, but I
That's great.
don't.
It's hard to fit that in. I mean,
True.
reading isn't. It's much easier to turn on the TV or stream a show or watch a YouTube video or a series of TikToks.
Mhm.
But to sit down and give your attention to words on a page when you've spent all day through screens reading emails and writing word documents, it's 15 books in this amount of time of the year is pretty substantial, you know.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll give myself a pat on the back.
You should. You should.
Because yeah, I that was a goal that was a goal of mine, is that I wanted to
Yeah.
do that. I will say this, and this has nothing, Tracy Davis, if you ever listen to this, just know that the big green book is on the shelf for the theories. I didn't read all of them. I hope you know that I got most of them. But this isn't about me, and I apologize. So we're on to the next thing. What is one piece of advice you live by in your practice? Or you could also be like Jeff and talk about three. It's up to you, really.
Oh, Jeff. I adore Jeff. So I guess what I would say is, so there's this book by Dorothy Allison, and it's called Two or Three Things I Know for Sure. And throughout the book, she has the refrain, two or three things I know for sure. And it's always something different, right? So one of them is two or three things I know for sure. And one of them is that I would rather go naked than wear the coat that the world made for me, right? But where she got the phrase from was from one of her aunts who said, yeah, two or three things I know for sure. Of course, it's never the same thing, and I'm never quite as sure as I'd like to be. And I think, I think about that as, it's something I try to remember, in that I'm never sure. There's always more to a story. There's always more to learn. There's always a deeper context that I might be missing. When I worked in student affairs, there's no absolutes about what's going to work and what's not going to work. There are way too many variables. We're working with people. Students are whole people, and our colleagues are whole people. And so, it's kind of like, Brené Brown says, people are hard to hate up close, right? It's easy to send that nasty email. It's easy to make up that story about the tweet that came out. It's easy to make up a story about the person who you saw do a job interview and you were incredibly unimpressed by, right? It's harder to remind yourself that maybe that's one of those things that you're not quite so sure about, or you're not as sure as you'd like to be, and maybe it's not the same thing that you were sure of last time. And so I guess, I try and remember that, because it helps me stay open in my teaching of what we read, how I'm going to frame a class might or might not work, even when I thought it would. And so I think that's really helpful. It's helpful. I think it's a really good ego check too, about, I am not an expert in anything. I only have various levels of expertise, and those are time bound. The things that I would have been really confident to talk about 5 years ago are things that maybe I haven't picked up and talked about, or kept up with. And so, we continue to grow, and we continue to change what the two or three things are that we're sure about. And so that's probably the one that's most rooted to how I live, or how I try and remember.
Gotcha. I was actually just talking to my mentor last night about how much power is in the phrase "I don't know," but I will figure it out. I will ask the right people, but just saying I don't know in what that entails, because I think that sometimes the things that we were talking through is that saying I don't know, you could have like a parental figure or someone like a teacher that says that, well, why don't you know? You have to know the answer to something. Whereas like, I think that sometimes like in our field, like with higher education, is that there's a lot of unknowns, and like what you were talking about specifically is that one time it didn't work, but if you retry it again, maybe different students show up to the program, different students, interact with the questions that, other students just sat there, and it goes back to what you had talked about too, about that 100% looks different all the time,
Yeah. I think that's a reason why I probably enjoy like teaching questions about ethics, right? Within a law class, right? Is, why do you make the choices that you make? The I don't know is a really vulnerable answer to a question. And The I don't know can't be where an answer stops, right? So is it, I don't know, let me look into that? Or is it, when I'm teaching, sometimes I say, I don't know. What do you all think? Or, I don't know, who wants to look this up?
Mhm.
Wikipedia is maybe not a academic source, but it is a really solid source for at least getting the basics of what's happening, or what you're working from. It's as close as you could get to a peer-reviewed uh, online free resource.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think it's important to remember, being vulnerable is great, and we need to support people through that vulnerability of saying, okay, and not fix it, but and what steps do we want to take next? How do we want to resolve this? I don't know why this program didn't work. I don't know why students weren't engaged. Okay, how do we want to find out? Like how can we encourage them to tell us more about why they didn't come? And that's the hardest question, I think, especially when you think about programming, is the people that don't come, you tend to not be able to find. And certainly may not be interested in answering the question of why they didn't come. Um, and so sometimes you have to do it, I think, from like a find out why people came and then see if you could deduce what was left, for why other people might not come, or making yourself vulnerable and going to different campus students and populations and saying, we have these events, but we notice that you don't attend, and that's not a judgment. How can we make these events more inviting to you, right? And I think people get a lot of ego about that too. Like, why wouldn't you come? Why wouldn't you be involved? I mean, there's a laundry list of reasons why students don't attend, and some of them are things that are more complicated than what we would imagine, right? Like, because I had to take care of my parent who is sick, because I have children, because your space is coded as a white space, and I don't like really want to be involved in that after, if I don't have to be, right? Or I don't I've been in your space before and I had a negative experience, right? You know,
Mhm. No, no, I totally understand. I totally
yeah.
understand where you're coming from with that. So,
I mean, there are very few things more humbling than getting that feedback and being able to honor it. And the same is true for like teaching evaluations, or you know reviewer number two. You know, typically when you get a journal manuscript back is the person who's mean. There's whole T-shirts out there that say mean things about reviewer number two.
I that's not something that I have stepped into yet. So, but when I do publish my manuscript, hopefully, journal or editor number two doesn't.
Reviewer
Or
number
number
two
two.
is it's a stereotype, but I have to tell you that sometimes it's true. Sometimes
Nice.
reviewer number one's really mean. I mean, and a lot of times, a lot of the journals are getting better about having reviewers that are not harsh.
Mhm.
Um, they still give really good feedback, but they frame it in really gentle or thoughtful ways, right? It's not meant to be punishing. It's meant to make you a better writer. But I mean, I think we have opportunities to get really good feedback about what we could be doing better, how we could be better people, and we need to be open to listening to them. And so that's why it's two or three things I know for sure, because I'm not sure, and it might be something different next time.
Makes sense. Makes total sense. But well, that wraps up the questions that I have for you, Chase. And thank you again for agreeing to be on this podcast, and for giving me your 100% today. I appreciate that. And just as a heads up to everyone at home, this will be this episode number 3. Episode number 4 will be with Cecilia Langell. As well as don't forget to follow us, subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on Spotify, because we are officially on Spotify now. So that's exciting. But once again, thank you all. Thank you, Chase. And I hope you all have a great rest of your evening.